high up in the hills of the north, where the slopes go up green and steep above the low country, and the air is thin and cool even in the warm part of the year. There lived a wise old teacher named Chiron, who kept a kind of house in a cave in the side of a mountain, and took in the children of certain families to raise and to teach. He was old, older than almost anyone, and he was patient in the way that only the very old are patient. And he had taught a great many boys over the long years, and he taught them the plain, useful things, how to walk far without tiring, and how to know the plants on the hillside, and how to set a bone and bind a wound, and how to be quiet, and how to wait. And among the children he was keeping in those years, there was a boy named Jason, who had been brought up to him small and left in his care, and who grew up on the mountain among the others, slowly, out of sight of the world below. It was a good place to be a child. The mountain rose up behind the cave in long green slopes, and below it the land fell away in folds toward the far-off plain and the gray line of the sea beyond. And the days on the hillside were long and simple and much alike. The boy learned the paths, and the springs where the water came up cold and clear, and the meadows where the wild flowers stood, and he grew tall and strong and easy in himself, the way a child does who has plenty of room and plenty of time, and someone steady looking after him. And Chiron, watching him grow, told him in time the plain fact of who he was, that his people had once kept the house of a town down on the plain, a town called Iolcus by the water, and that the keeping of it had passed some years before to an uncle of his, a man named Peleus, who had long held the hall and long minded its affairs. And when the boy was grown, or nearly grown, tall now, and steady on his feet, and ready in the way of the young, to go and see the world he had only looked down on from above, he made up his mind to go down out of the hills and walk to Iolcus and see the town of his people. And Chiron did not keep him. The old teacher had raised a great many boys, and sent a great many of them off down the mountain in their time, and he knew the leaving for what it was, a plain and proper thing, the next step on a long road. And he saw the boy to the edge of the high meadows, and said his quiet farewells, and let him go. So the boy went down. He came down out of the high green country by the long paths he knew, walking easily, with a plain traveler's bundle and a good staff, down through the pines and out below them onto the open slopes, and down again through the folded lower hills where the goats grazed, and down at last toward the flat country and the plain, where the land ran out level toward the distant sea. Toward the bottom of the hills he came to a river, a wide, slow river running across his way, swollen and brown and high, with the meltwater coming down off the mountains, spread out broad over its stones, so that the crossing of it was not the easy step it would have been in a drier season. And there was an old woman there at the edge of the water, waiting to get across, and unable to, small and bent and patient at the bank. And the boy, who had been raised to it, took her up without much thought and carried her over on his back, wading slow and careful through the cold brown water, with the old woman light upon his shoulders, feeling for each footing among the hidden stones. And halfway across, in the pull of the current, one of his sandals worked loose in the soft mud of the bottom and was gone, sucked off his foot and carried away down the water before he could catch it, so that he came up onto the far bank wet to the waist, and set the old woman gently down, and went on from there with one foot bare, one sandal on and one sandal gone, down the last of the road toward the town. And so it was, one sandaled and mud-splashed and easy from his long walk, that Jason came at last to Iolcus, into the streets of the town of his people, down among the houses and the market and the ordinary business of a place by the sea, and made his way to the great hall where the keeping of the town was done, and came before his uncle Apelius, who held it. And the two of them spoke, the young man newly down from the hills, and the older man who had long minded the hall. And it was a cool and level conversation, without heat in it, the older man taking the measure of the younger, and the younger standing plainly before him. And in the course of that talk, Apelius, who did not much want to give up the keeping of the house, spoke to the young man of a long errand that wanted doing, a voyage far off across the eastern sea to fetch back a famous thing that was kept there, a golden fleece hung in a distant grove. And he put it to the young man calmly, as a thing worth the doing, a long journey for a young man with his life before him. And the young man, being young and fresh down from the mountain, and eager for the world, said that he would go. A voyage of that length wanted a ship of a kind that had not quite been built before, longer than the fishing boats that worked the bay, and stronger than the little coasting craft that crept from headland to headland. A ship that could carry 50 men and their gear across the whole eastern sea and bring them back again. And so, before anything else could happen, there had to be the building of her. And the building took a good while, most of a season, and it happened in a yard by the water at a place called Epagacy, a little way along the shore from the town, where there was a good flat beach to work on and deep water close in for the launching. The man who saw to the building was a shipwright named Argus, a careful, unhurried man who knew timber the way a farmer knows soil. And he began, as such work begins, with the choosing of the wood. He went up into the hills above the shore where the tall trees grew, the pines for the planking and the oak for the keel and the ribs. And he walked among them and looked at them and chose the ones he wanted, the straight ones and the sound ones, the trees that had grown slow and even without a twist in them. And these were felled and trimmed and dragged down the long slope to the yard by teams of oxen, and laid out there on the flat ground to be worked. And then the work of shaping began, and it was slow and steady and pleasant to watch. The kind of work that goes on all day at an even pace and shows a little more done at the end of each day than there was at the start. First, the keel was laid, the long backbone of the ship, a single great balk of oak set level on blocks down the middle of the yard, and from it the shape of the whole ship would grow. Then the ribs were raised off the keel one by one, curved timbers set upright along its length, close together like the bones of a great fish, each one shaped by hand with the adze until it sat just right, so that after some weeks of this, there stood in the yard the bare frame of a ship, an open cage of pale new wood, and a person passing could begin to see the shape of the hull in it, long and lean and rising at the ends. The sound of the yard in those weeks was the steady sound of the adzes, the slow chock of the curved blades biting into the wood, and the pale chips flying and gathering in drifts underfoot. and the men worked at it from the first light to the evening, a whole crew of them, some shaping ribs and some splitting out the long planks, and some boring the holes for the pegs. And when the frame was up and true, the planking went on. The long pine boards bent along the curve of the ribs and fastened down, plank overlapping plank from the keel upward, each one pegged and pinned into place, so that day by day the open cage of ribs filled in and closed over and became a solid thing, a hull that would hold out the water and hold in the men. And when the hull was planked and whole, there was the making of it tight, which was the last of the slow work, the pressing of caulking into every seam between the planks, twisted plant fiber, driven hard into the joints with a blunt tool and a mallet, so that no water could work its way through. And then over the caulking and over the whole of the outside of the hull went the pitch, the dark, sticky pine tar warmed until it flowed, brushed on thick, and even until the ship was sealed all over, and gleaming black and smelling of the woods, watertight now and ready for the sea. There was rope in great coils for the rigging and the anchor stones, and there were the anchor stones themselves, big holed stones to hold her when she lay off ashore. And there were the benches for the rowers set in their rows down the length of her, and the steering oar hung at the stern, a great broad blade on a long shaft that one man could lean on to hold her course. And a figure was carved for the prow, and the whole ship was given her name, which was the Argo, after the man who had built her. And she stood there finished in the yard, high and dark and new, waiting for the water. The launching was done on a calm morning at the top of the tide, with half the town come down to the shore to see it. Rollers of smooth log were laid down the beach from where she stood to the edge of the sea, and lines were made fast to her. And the men took hold, a great many of them, on the lines and at her sides, and they eased her forward down the rollers little by little, all leaning together, the great hull moving slow, and then a little faster over the logs, with a deep groaning of timber, down the last of the beach and into the shallows, until the sea took her weight and lifted her, and she floated and swung gently to her lines, riding light, and even on the calm water of the bay for the first time. And there she lay off the shore in the morning light, dark and trim and afloat, rising and falling a little on the slow swell the new ship on the old sea, and the men looked at her from the beach and were pleased with her, and knew that the long part, the building, was done, and that now there was only the gathering of the company, and then the sea. Word had gone out in the way that word went out in those days, carried by travelers and traders from town to town, along the coast, and inland from valley to valley, that a ship was building at Epagasi for a long voyage east, and that a company was wanted, the best that could be found, and that any who had a mind for the sea and the far places should come down to the beach by Iolcus and take an oar. And so, through the last of the weeks while the ship was finished and floated, the men began to arrive, not all at once, and not in any grand procession, but one at a time and two at a time, coming down the shore roads with their gear on their backs, walking in out of the wide country to the beach where the Argo lay off in the bay. And this is the part of the story that is pleasantest simply to sit with, the slow gathering of them, each coming quietly in and setting down his bundle and becoming one of the company. There came a very big man, broad and slow and quiet, who had walked a long way and thought little of it, a man whose name went before him wherever he went. For he was Heracles, the strongest of all the men of that age, who had done a great many hard things in his time, and was between one long task and another just then, and had a mind to see the eastern sea. He came in off the road without any fuss, a huge, easy man with a plain club of olive wood and a lion skin over his shoulders, and he sat down among the others on the sand as if he were nobody in particular, and the company was glad to have him, for his weight on an oar was worth two of anyone else's. There came a slight, still man with a lyre under his arm, and he was Orpheus, who was the finest singer and player anyone had ever heard, a man whose music could quiet a restless company or lift a tired one. And it was said that when he played, even the wild things of the hills would come and stand and listen, and the rivers would slow to hear him. He did not look like much, a quiet man with quiet hands, but they wanted him badly, for on a long voyage the singer sets the time for the oars and holds the men together through the empty hours, and there is no better thing to have aboard than a voice. There came two brothers, so alike that people took a while to tell them apart, Acaster and Apollodeuces, young men and famous already, the one a horseman and the other a boxer, easy and cheerful and always together. And they came down to the beach side by side, and took their places side by side, as they did everything, and they were good to have along, for they were even-tempered and steady, and never quarreled with anyone. There came, to the surprise of some, a woman, a huntress named Atalanta, who had been raised in the wild hills, and could run faster and shoot straighter than almost any man alive. A lean, quiet, watchful person who kept a little to herself and missed nothing. And there were some who murmured at a woman on the voyage, but she took her place among them plainly and asked for nothing, and was soon just another of the company, another good pair of hands and a keen pair of eyes. There came a seaman named Atiphus, and he was the one they most needed, for he was a steersman, a man who understood the sea and the winds and the reading of the water better than anyone, who could hold a ship on her course through a long night by the stars, and know a shoal by the color of the water over it, and bring a vessel safe through places others would not try. From the day he came aboard, the handling of the ship was his, and the men were easy in their minds knowing it. There came a man named Elincius, who had the keenest sight of anyone in the world, so keen that he could see a great way off, farther than other people, could make out a low coast when it was still below the edge of the sea for everyone else, and could tell a rock from a shadow at a distance where others saw only haze. And a man like that is worth a great deal at sea, where the first thing to know is always what lies ahead and how far off it is. And so Elincius was given a place forward in the bow to be the eyes of the ship, and he took it gladly. And so they came, one after another over those last days, until the company was full, some 50 of them all told, one for every oar, gathered from every part of the country, the strong and the swift and the far-sighted and the wise in the sea. And each of them had a name and a story of his own that could be told on another night. But here they are only the company, the men who came down to the beach and took their oars. And in the evenings, while they waited for the last of them, and for a fair wind, they camped there on the sand by the drawn-up gear, and cooked their food, and mended their kit, and talked in the long dusk. And Orpheus played for them, low and easy, and the sound of it went out over the water, and the ship rode quiet at her mooring off the shore, dark against the last of the light, waiting to carry them all away east in the morning. And little by little, they came to know one another, as men do who are going to share a small ship and a long road, so that by the time the wind came fair, they were no longer 50 strangers on a beach, but a single company, glad to be going. The wind came fair at last, out of the south and west, and on a clear morning the men went aboard and took their oars and cast off the mooring lines, and the Argo swung her head out toward the open water and left the bay, and the shore of Iolcus fell away behind and grew low, and then blue, and then was gone, and there was nothing around them but the sea. And so the voyage began, and it settled at once into the long, even rhythm that would hold it for weeks. The dip and pull of the 50 oars when the wind failed, the set of the square sail when it blew fair, the slow passing of one gray headland after another down the coast, and the days ran together in the pleasant sameness of a ship making a long passage, work and rest and work again, and the sea going by. Their first long stop was at an island called Lemnos, a green and pleasant island lying out in the northern sea, where the people made them welcome and asked them to stay a while. And they did stay longer than they had meant to, for the island was kind and the welcome was warm, and there is always a pull on a long voyage toward the places that are gentle. The women of the island kept the place and worked it and had need of hands, and the company was in no hurry. And so for a good while the Argo lay drawn up on the Lemnian shore, and the men rested and ate well and grew easy. And it was only after some weeks that they remembered the long road still before them, and gathered themselves, and said their farewells, and put to sea again, rested and glad of the stop, and turned the ship north once more. Northward the sea narrowed, and they came into a country of channels and headlands, and there they put in at a place ruled by a young king named Isisychus, a friendly, open-handed young man near their own ages, who took them in gladly and feasted them, and told them what he knew of the waters ahead. And they passed a good day and evening there, and parted from him as friends, and rode on. But the wind turned against them in the dark, and worked around, and drove them back in the night without their knowing it, so that they came again, all unaware, to the same shore they had left, and a fog had come down thick over the water, a gray, blind fog in which nothing could be told from anything. And in that fog, the ship and the shore mistook one another, each taking the other for strangers, for no one could see, and there was a confusion in the dark, a groping and a calling that came to nothing, until at last the fog thinned toward morning and lifted, and the light came, and in the gray of the dawn each side saw the other plainly at last, and knew it, and saw that it had all been a mistake of the dark and the weather, friends who had not known each other in the fog. And they grieved over it quietly, and set it right as well as it could be set, and stayed a little, and then, subdued and thoughtful, they went on. And a little farther along that coast came the parting that the story most remembers, and it was not a loud one. They had put in at a wooded shore for water and rest, and among the company was a young man named Ahylas, who had come on the voyage with Heracles and was dear to him. And Ahylas went off inland with a jar to find fresh water for the ship, up through the trees to where a spring was said to rise. And he found it, a still clear pool in a quiet green hollow among the trees, a lovely secret place with the water welling up cold and silent into it, and the light coming down green through the leaves. And it was so quiet there, and so far from the sea and the oars and the crowded deck, that the young man stayed. He set down his jar at the edge of the pool and sat by the still water in the green shade, and the quiet of the place came over him, and he stayed there and did not come back. And when he did not come back, Heracles went to look for him, up into the trees, calling, going farther and farther inland along the wooded slopes, searching for him, deep into the country away from the shore. And while the big man was gone searching, the wind came fair again, fair and strong for the north, the wind they had been waiting for, and the ship was ready, and the tide was right. And in the way that these things sometimes happen, the Argo put out on that fair wind and stood away north, and Heracles was still inland searching, and Ahylas was still by his quiet pool, and the ship went on without the two of them. It was only well out to see that the company understood that they had left them, and there was some sorrow over it, and some argument about turning back. But the wind held fair, and the road was long, and in the end they let it be, and sailed on, and the great man and the young man were left behind on that green shore, the one still searching, and the one content by his still water. And the Argo carried the rest of them away north, over the grey sea, toward the Narrows, and the far coasts beyond, 50 oars now less 2 going on. And that was the manner of it, all along that first long reach of the voyage, the way a long journey quietly loses some of the people who set out on it, not with any great event, but simply because a place was kind, or a pool was quiet, and the ship, in the end, must go on where the wind takes it, and does, farther along the narrowing sea, on a bare and windy coast. There lived an old blind king named Iphineus, who had once been able to see farther into things than most people, and who lived now alone in a plain stone house above the water, with a great trouble on him, which was that he could not eat. His table would be laid for him, and the food set out, and he would reach for it, and each time a wind would come, a sudden gusting wind out of nowhere, and lift the food off the table and carry it away, so that whatever was set before him was gone before he could take it. And the old man had grown thin and weary and faint with the long going without, and had almost given up hoping that anyone would come who could help him. But he had known, in his old far-seeing way, that a ship would come, and when the Argo put in at his shore, and the company came up to his house, he knew them for the ones he had waited for, and he told them his trouble quietly, the way the very tired tell things. And they said they would try to help him, and they laid his table for him again, and set the food out, and waited, and watched. And when the old man reached for the food, the wind came as it always came, the sudden lifting, gusting wind that swept in to take everything off the table. But this time the company was ready, and among them were 2 swift, keen-eyed brothers, who rose up as the wind came and went out after it, out and up along the coast on the wind's own track, following it and driving it on and away, farther and farther from the old man's house, until the wind was gone right away over the sea and did not come back. For it had been asked at last to go, and to trouble the old man no longer, and it went, and kept away, and left the coast quiet behind it. And so the old king ate at last, sitting quiet at his own table, with the food staying where it was put, eating slowly and carefully, the way a person eats who has gone a long time without. And the company sat with him while he ate, he grew stronger before their eyes, the color coming back into him. And when he had eaten and rested, he was so grateful to them that he gave them the thing they most needed, which was knowledge of the way ahead. For he knew the eastern sea, and he told them of the road to Acolchis, and above all of a hard place they would come to soon, a narrow gate in the sea, and how they were to pass it. For a little farther on, he said, at the very mouth of the narrow sea where it opened out toward the east, there stood two great rocks, one on either side of the channel, two dark headlands of stone that did not stay quite still, but leaned and shifted and came together and drew apart again in the swell, so that the gap between them opened and closed, and a ship that timed it wrong might be caught in the narrow way as they leaned in. And the way through, the old man said, was not strength and not speed alone, but patience and timing, the watching for the moment. And he told them what to do. They were to take a dove, he said, and carry it with them. And when they came to the narrows, they were to send the dove ahead first, and let it fly through, and watch it, and see how it fared. And by the dove they would know their moment. And then they were to wait for the rocks to lean apart. And when the rocks did, to go all together, and not to stop. And they would be through before the rocks leaned back. And they thanked him, and rested a last night at his house, and took the dove he gave them, and put to sea again toward the narrows. And in time they came to them, and it was as he had said, two great dark rocks at the mouth of the channel, leaning slowly together and slowly apart in the long swell, with the open eastern sea beyond them shining through the gap. And they lay off a little and watched, and steadied the ship, and got their timing. And when the moment looked right, they loosed the dove, and it flew up and darted ahead through the gap between the rocks, quick and small over the water, and went through, and came out safe on the far side. And by that they knew it could be done, and knew the moment for it. And they watched the rocks lean apart to their widest, and Antiphus called the stroke, and every man bent to his oar together, and the Argo shot forward into the narrow way, driving through the gap on the pull of 50 oars, steady and hard and all together. And she went through the middle of it, and out the far side into the open water beyond, while the rocks were still wide, and came out onto the broad eastern sea through the gate, with the narrows behind her. was said afterward that once a ship had passed between them so cleanly and in good time, the two rocks left off their leaning and settled and stood still from that day, fixed and quiet at the mouth of the channel as ordinary headlands are, so that they never again closed on anything, but only stood there in the sea as they stand now, two dark stones at the edge of the narrows, with the water going quiet between them. And the Argo past the gate now and out on the wide eastern sea at last, turned her head for the far shore, and the men took up the long steady rhythm again and rowed on east toward Icolcus with the hardest of the road, so they thought. Behind them the eastern sea went on a long way, longer than any reach they had crossed before, day after day of open water with no land in it, the ship small under the wide sky, and the men settled deep into the rhythm of the passage. And then at last, far ahead, on a morning when the keen-eyed man in the bow had been watching a long while, there came the first low line of the far coast lifting slowly out of the sea, the country of Icolcus, the eastern edge of the world, the place they had come all that way to reach. And they raised it slowly, as a ship raises a low coast, the line growing and hardening through the day into hills behind and a green shore before, and behind the hills, faint and blue and enormous, the great mountains standing up along the far edge of everything, and they came in toward it in the evening light and looked at the strange land they had crossed the whole sea to find. The coast opened as they came near into the mouth of a great river, a wide, slow brown river coming down out of the mountains and spreading into the sea through a country of low green banks and broad reed beds. And they took the ship in over the bar on the evening tide and up into the river's mouth, in out of the sea at last into still fresh water. And it was a strange, quiet feeling after so long on the open sea, the ship gliding up a smooth brown river between banks of tall reeds, with the sea sighing softly behind them and the land close on either hand. They went up the river slowly in the last of the light, past the reeds standing still and gray-green in the windless evening, and found a place to lie for the night against a bank, and made the ship fast there, and lay quiet, having come at the very end of the long road into the land itself. The country of Icolcus was a rich and settled land, well watered by its great river, with fields and orchards along the banks, and a city upon rising ground, and above the city the house of the king, who was named Aeetes, a large stone house set about with courtyards and colonnades, grander and stranger than anything in the towns they had left behind. And when they had made themselves ready, they went up to that house, a small party of them with Aegeson at the head, up through the ordered fields and the quiet streets to the king's gate, and were brought in through the courtyards to stand before Aeetes in his hall. And it was a quiet, watchful sort of welcome, the welcome of a foreign court that does not quite know what to make of strangers, courteous on the surface and careful underneath. The king sitting grave and cool in his own hall and looking the travelers over, and the travelers standing plainly before him and telling, as plainly as they could, who they were and how far they had come and what they had come for. And Aegeson told him, standing there, that they had crossed the whole sea from the west to ask for the golden fleece that was kept in his country. And Aeetes heard him out, cool and unmoved, and did not say no, but did not say yes either, in the way of kings who mean to set a price. He said that the fleece might be had by a man who could do certain things first, certain tasks in a field of his, and he named them evenly as a list of work to be done, and left it hanging there in the cool hall that the tasks were not small ones. And the company heard him out and understood that the fleece would not simply be given, and took their leave for the time, courteous and careful, and went back down through the quiet courtyards to think on it. But there was in the king's house a daughter, a young woman named Medea, who had been there in the hall, quiet at the edge of things, watching the strangers as they spoke. And Medea was a person of a particular kind of knowledge. She had been raised among the plants of that rich country and had learned them deeply, all their names and natures and uses, which root would ease a pain, and which leaf would bring on sleep, and which pressed oil would soothe a burn or calm a fever. The whole quiet lore of growing things that some people keep, and she was skilled in it beyond anyone, a healer and a knower of plants, gentle and grave and clever. And she had looked at the strangers and at Aegeson among them, and something in her had gone out to them, to these travelers so far from home, with a hard road still before them. And she she made up her mind, quietly, in her own heart, that she would help them if she could, out of the knowledge she had. For she knew the tasks her father had set, and knew that there were ways through them that had nothing to do with strength, ways that lay in the knowledge of plants and the right ointment at the right time. And she had that knowledge and was minded to give it. And so, in the days that followed, while the company lay by their ship among the reeds and turned the hard tasks over and wondered how any of it could be done, there was quietly forming, up in the great house, a friend they did not yet know they had, a young woman with the knowledge of every growing thing in that country, and a mind already set on helping them. And far off across the fields, seen small and dark from the ship at the bend of the river, standing among its own quiet trees, was the grove where the fleece hung, waiting at the very end of the world for them to come and take it down. The tasks the king had set were 3, and Maadia came quietly to the company by their ship and told them how each might be done, and gave Jason what he needed for it. And it is a restful thing to go through the 3 of them in order, for each, in this telling, is a piece of slow, careful work and nothing more. The first was the plowing of a field with a pair of the king's great bulls, 2 enormous animals kept in a paddock beyond the town, larger than any oxen the travelers had seen, broad and heavy and warm, with a deep, slow breath to them, and a great, slow strength. Animals that had never been yoked and did not care to be, and the task was to yoke them and plow a field with them between the morning and the evening. And Maadia gave Jason for this an ointment she had made from the plants she knew, a salve that made the skin proof for a while against heat and against harm, and steadied the hands, so that a man wearing it could go up calmly to the great warm animals without fear of them. And in the cool of the morning, Jason went out to the paddock with the ointment on him, calm and unhurried, and went in among the 2 big slow bulls. And they turned their great heads and breathed their warm breath over him, and found him unafraid. And he laid his hands on them and spoke to them low, and brought them round, and got the yoke over their broad necks, and hitched them to the plow. And then he plowed the field with them, up and down the long furrows through the morning, the 2 great animals leaning slow and steady into the yoke, and the earth turning over behind the share. And by the middle of the day, field was plowed, and he loosed them and let them go. And they wandered off warm and calm to graze, and the first task was done. The second task was a strange one, for the king gave Jason a helmet full of seed to sow in the plowed field, and the seed was not grain, but something else. And Medea had told him what would happen and what to do. He walked the furrows in the afternoon, casting the seed by the handful into the fresh-turned earth. And then he waited, and as he watched, out of the ground there came up slowly a strange crop, for the field grew figures, men of a kind, rising up out of the furrows fully grown and armed, one after another, until the whole field stood full of them, silent and upright in the afternoon light. And this was the part that might have gone hard, but Medea had told him the trick of it, which was simple. He took up a stone, a plain, heavy field stone, and he cast it out into the middle of them, over their heads, so that it fell among them on the far side, and the figures turned all together toward where the stone had landed, their attention drawn off entirely to that one spot, all of them looking away from him toward the far corner of the field. And as they stood so, turned away and taken up with the stone, the strength seemed to go out of them, and one by one, and then all together they settled and sank back down, and lay down again in the furrows they had risen from, and were still, and the field that had stood full of standing figures was only a plowed field again, with the evening coming on, quiet and empty. And the second task was done. And then there was the fleece itself, and the getting of it, and this was the third thing. And it was done at night, quietly, with Medea leading the way, for she knew the grove and the path to it. The golden fleece hung in a grove of old dark trees, a little way from the town. The shining hide of a ram hung over a branch in the middle of the grove, where it had hung a long time, and the grove was watched. For coiled at the foot of the tree, all round the roots of it, there lived a long animal, a great serpent, a creature that was always awake, that never closed its eyes by day or night, but kept its slow watch there among the roots year in and year out. And no one had ever come near the fleece because of it. And Medea went into the grove ahead of them, quiet in the dark, up close close to the great watchful animal, and she worked her quiet art on it, sprinkling drops and singing a low, even song, on and on, soothing and steady. And the long animal that had been awake so many years grew heavy at last under her voice, and its slow head sank down, and its eyes that had never closed, and it lay still among the roots, asleep at last, quiet in the dark. And then it was the simplest thing in the world. Jason went past the sleeping animal, stepping quiet over the coils of it, up to the tree where the fleece hung, and he reached up and took hold of it and lifted it down off the branch, the way a person lifts a heavy blanket down off a line where it has hung out to dry, gathering the soft, shining weight of it into his arms, and turned and carried it back out of the grove, past the sleeping serpent, and out under the dark trees to where the others waited. And that was all. The thing they had crossed the whole world for was carried away, folded in a man's arms, heavy and soft and shining faintly in the dark. And they went down through the fields with it to the ship, quietly, in the last of the night. And the grove behind them was still, and the long animal slept on among the roots, and the fleece was theirs. And now there was only the going home. They came down the great river to the sea in the gray before dawn, drifting quietly down with the current between the reed beds. The fleece stowed safe aboard, and Maadia with them now, for she had chosen to leave her father's country and go west with the ship. And they went out over the bar on the ebb tide into the open sea, and turned the ship's head west, toward home, and began the long way back. And the way back was long as the way out had been, the whole width of the eastern sea to recross, and all the coasts beyond it. And the story of the homeward voyage is mostly the story of a great deal of water going by, the ship standing steadily west day after day, the men settling once more into the old rhythm of the oars, and the sail, the sea running past the hull, the sun going down ahead of them a little farther round each evening as the year turned. They went a different way home from the way they had come, or so the old tellings say, a long wandering way round by other seas and other rivers, and it took them a great while, and carried them through many quiet places, but the shape of it was always the same, the ship going on, the water going by, one long day of passage after another strung together into weeks. And they came in time back into into seas they half knew, and then into seas they knew well, and began to pass islands whose names they had heard, working their way down and west through the scattered islands of the middle sea toward the last stretch of open water that lay between them and home. And among the last of the islands there was one where a strange thing stood, and it is the last of the wonders of the voyage and the gentlest to tell. For on that island, out on a headland above the sea, there stood a tall figure made all of bronze, a great bronze man, taller than a man, that had stood on that headland a very long time, keeping a kind of watch over the island, walking its shores by day. A huge, slow, gleaming figure of metal moving along the cliffs against the sky. And as the Argo came in toward the island for water, the bronze figure was there on the headland above them, tall and bright in the sun, and the men looked up at it, uneasy, not knowing what it might do. But Maidea, who understood how things are made and how they hold together, saw the one place where the metal of it was joined, a single fastening low down that held the whole of it together, and she worked her quiet knowledge on it from below, until that one fastening loosened and gave, and the long strength that had held the figure upright ran slowly out of it, and the great bronze man up on the headland simply stopped. He stood a moment longer, tall and bright and still against the sky, and then slowly, with a deep sound of settling metal, he sat down on the headland where he had stood so long, and was still, a great seated bronze figure looking out over the sea, moving no more. And the ship took her water in peace below him, and put out again, and left him sitting there on his headland above the water, quiet now, a strange calm shape that the men looked back at as they rowed away, and then no more. And after that there was only the last of the sea, the home water, the long final reach westward, and the men rowed it with the special steadiness of people near the end of a long road, saying little, each of them full of the thought of home. And one evening, the keen-eyed man in the bow saw the last coast, low and blue and unmistakable on the edge of the sea ahead, the coast of their own country, the hills above Iolcus that they had not seen in more than a year. And he told them quietly, and they looked, was home, come up at last out of the sea ahead of them, exactly where it should be. They came into the bay at Iolcus in the evening, on a quiet sea, the same bay they had sailed out of so long before, and it was all as it had been. The curve of the shore, the hills behind, the town along the water with the smoke going up from the evening cooking, the beach where the ship had first been floated. And they brought the Argo in slowly across the still water of the bay, the tired men pulling the last few strokes of the whole enormous voyage, and ran her gently up onto the beach where she had begun, the keel grinding softly into the sand, and she came to rest there and stopped, and the long voyage was over. And the men shipped their oars and climbed down stiffly onto the sand and stood on the solid ground of home after so long on the water. And it was quiet, and it was evening, and they were back. There was no great noise made of it. They drew the ship up the beach above the tide line, as sailors do at the end of a voyage, and made her fast, and unloaded their gear, and the Fleece was carried up to the town, and word went round quietly that the Argo was home. And that was the end of the voyage, the ship drawn up on the beach, and the men going up the shore to their own doors, and the great sea behind them gone quiet, and the long road all rolled up now into a thing that had been done and put away in the calm of an ordinary evening at the end of a long year gone. And the ship stayed there, drawn up on the shore above the tide, long after the voyage was done and the men had scattered to their own lives. Season after season, she lay on the beach in the grass at the top of the sand, her dark hull graying slowly in the salt air, her timbers settling, the pitch cracking a little and softening in the warm months, and hardening again in the cool ones, and no one took her out any more. The grass grew up around her, year by year, first in thin blades against the keel, and then thicker, climbing her sides, until the long dune grass stood all about her and leaned against her and half hid her from the shore. The sea came and went below her on the beach, near and steady, the same slow sea. Small green things took root in the seams of her deck, and she went quiet and quieter, settling deeper into the grass with every passing year, until she was only a long, low shape in the dunes above the water, resting. Sleep well,